Thank you for joining us today. My name is Lisa Ammon, and I serve as president of the Louisville Forum. We meet on the second Wednesday of every month at Vincenzo's Restaurant. The Louisville Forum is a nonpartisan public policy group founded in 1984. We host debates and discussions of contemporary and sometimes controversial public policy issues. We cover topics from heroin addiction to the Confederate Monument to the 2016 elections. For more information on the Louisville Forum, our programs, or to make a reservation, please visit our website at louisvilleforum.org. Our topic for this month is the 2017 Kentucky General Assembly. Our moderator today is Ryland Barton. He is the State Capitol Bureau Chief for the Kentucky Public Radio Network, a collaboration of public radio stations in Louisville, Richmond, Bowling Green, and Murray. A Lexington native, Ryland graduated from the University of Chicago with a bachelor's degree in English and the University of Texas with a master's degree in journalism. He worked in Austin and later Waco before coming home to Kentucky 2 years ago. Ryland works out of Frankfort, and he's now covering his third General Assembly. Please welcome Ryland.
Thanks, everyone, for having me. Today we'll be reviewing the first week of the 2017 General Assembly, which passed a whole lot of bills quickly into law. It's my pleasure to first introduce Democratic Senator Morgan McGarvey, who represents Senate District 19, including much of Louisville's Highlands and parts of southeast Jefferson County. First elected in 2012, McGarvey's been in the minority party for the entirety of his Senate career. He's an attorney for Morgan and Pottinger and serves on the Appropriations Committee and State Government Committee. Please welcome Senator Morgan McGarvey.
Thank you, Ryland. I had to rub it in. No, it's good to be here. Thank you to the Forum for having me. I see a lot of my Democratic friends here in the room today, so I wanted to let you all know there are grief counselors and Kleenex available at the exits at the end of the meeting today. Last week I did this preview for the State Chamber of Commerce meeting, so it's good to be home. As I told them, Mariah Carey called our office last week and said, "Man, you guys had it rough." But the reality is, what could you expect? Republicans have been waiting for 95 years to take control of the House of Representatives, and it happened, and the celebration is on. But now when the dust settles on this initial week of bills that have been passed, the campaign promises have been fulfilled, the truly big issues, tax reform, education, health care, pensions, job creation, those remain. And to truly be effective on those measures, we need input from both sides. Simply writing the national right-wing talking points into law will not take our state where we need to be. As Senator McConnell actually said, the truly big ideas, the truly big policy initiatives, those require input from both sides. On that, we agree. It's certainly been true during my time in Frankfort. Look at what we did on heroin reform, on the heroin bill. Yes, we increased the penalties for traffickers. But you know what? We went after the root of the problem. We provided treatment for those who are addicted, recognizing you can't just incarcerate your way out of this problem. We created public-private partnerships that were necessary to move government forward. When it came time to expand wireless and broadband services in Kentucky, we did that, but we put in protections for those that just want basic landline service. And when Kentucky could have been in the national spotlight for the wrong reason on the marriage license bill, with the leadership from the legislature and the governor's office, we created a compromise that treats everyone equally and got the endorsement of everyone from Kim Davis to the Fairness Campaign. We know how to do this. We can work together. But this last week's release of abortion bills and anti-union pieces of legislation alone will not put us where we need to be. We have to do better. The pieces are there, and I truly believe this to do that, though. Speaker Hoover and President Stivers of the Senate, they are both strong, sensible leaders. They are capable of listening to their conservative constituencies while respecting input from across the aisle. I also put my friend and colleague Jerry Miller in that camp. We also have a lot of new faces in Frankfort, and that makes a big difference. We have 28 new members of the House, 2 new members of the Senate, 30 new members, a lot of new faces. And I can tell you that I think Democrats are ready to work with the new legislators, the majority, and the governor. Tax reform. If we're going to do it, and we absolutely should, we have to work together to make sure it's not just a piece of legislation that takes care of the country club crowd, the already comfortable. We can't continue to balance our budget on the backs of the working class, the middle class, and the poor in Kentucky. You know what? There are bipartisan studies out there, though, and those show that we can broaden the base and lower the rates. This is important to make a tax climate that is more business-friendly, but is also less regressive. Education. We can all agree that we want the best education for our kids. There's a case to be made for charter schools, but it can't simply be a for-profit scheme that caters to the already wealthy and well-to-do students, those students whose parents already choose where they want to be, right? You know, I went to Portland Elementary here in Louisville, and I met with them, and I watched their reading recovery program, which is an awesome deal. They sit one-on-one with kids in the first grade to make sure they don't fall behind. Really cool to see them do. But I sat down with the teacher and the principal afterwards, and I said, what's the biggest problem you face in your school this year? You know what the principal told me? Half of their kindergartners aren't potty trained. How do you teach a kid to read when you have to teach them how to go to the bathroom? We can't just build a new school and proclaim victory. So, we have to take care of lower education. We also have to move on to higher education, right? You know, higher education is incredibly important. We have a right to work bill in Kentucky. Now what? We know that businesses want an educated and trained workforce. But Kentucky, since 2008, has cut per student appropriations by 32%. We are one of only 4 out of 20 southern states that have not increased our higher education budget in the last 4 years. And you know what? All the states that have increased their higher education budget, they're right-to-work states too. If we're going to compete, then we have to give businesses what they really want, and that is an educated and trained workforce. We also need to give them a healthy workforce, and we can come together on healthcare in Kentucky. Let's pass a statewide smoking ban. Let's have a healthier workforce here in Kentucky. You know what? 443,000 Kentuckians have health insurance now, many for the first time because of the expansion of the Affordable Care Act. We're already seeing healthier outcomes. The question shouldn't be, how can we continue to go on with health care? The question should be, how can we afford not to? If John Calipari and Rick Pitino can get together and record a podcast, then Democrats and Republicans can get together and figure out the best way to have the healthiest state of Kentucky. You know, we have worked together. We can do that. We've worked together on pensions, but that problem remains. We've enacted reforms, but we have to do more. I don't want to be the person that tells our school teachers, that tells the people who pave our roads, that tell the people that keep our county government buildings open, that they're not going to get the retirement they paid into because we let the system crumble. We have an unfunded liability. There's only one way to fix an unfunded liability, and that's by funding it. So let's look for additional revenue. Let's finally put expanded gaming on the ballot and let the people of Kentucky decide if that's how they want to collect revenue. We have it all across our borders that cars are leaving and taking their cash across the river. Let's give the people of Kentucky that choice. Let's put local investments for transformation on the ballot. Let's see if communities want to choose how to collect their own revenue to improve the places where they live. And you know what? Let's attract more businesses here. Aside from education and healthcare, let's make sure that we don't pass bathroom bills and so-called religious freedom initiatives that drive away economic development and talented young professionals. Because the bottom line is we can work together. And it's because we all want the same things. No matter where you live, no matter what your party registration, no matter where you call home, we want to make sure Kentucky is better, safer, more prosperous for our children. We can do that, but we should do it through partnership, not partisanship. We should do it by working together, not staying apart. We should do it by using open minds and not closed fists. I'm here to tell you, I think the pieces are in place in this General Assembly to make that happen, and at least the Democrats stand ready.
Thank you, Senator McGarvey. Next up is Republican Representative Jerry Miller, who represents House District 36, including Eastwood and the easternmost 20% of Jefferson County. Miller served on the Louisville Metro Council from 2010 until 2014. He also served as commissioner of the state park system in former Governor Ernie Fletcher's administration. Serving since 2015 in the minority party, Miller was named chair of the House State Government Committee this year after Republicans took a majority of seats in the state House on Election Day. The committee will be tasked with finding solutions for the state's public pension crisis. Please welcome Representative Jerry Miller.
I've been in the minority. I've been in the majority. I prefer the majority. I've already found that out. I think the flurry of activity you saw in the last week, I would attribute it to pin-up demand, let's say, or pin-up frustrations, or pin-up whatever. We have made a statement, I think, and I think the remainder of the session is going to be more like a normal short session. I think what you've seen is the flurry of activity that addressed a lot of long-standing priorities that Republicans have had. Let me go back to December. In anticipation of this session, I surveyed my constituents. I have an electronic newsletter. Over 500 people receive, or actually, they get it. About half of them open it. And I did a survey of 12 issues. Of those 12 issues, the top ones were as follows. Number 1 was tort reform. 2, enable charter schools. 3 was repeal the prevailing wage. Check. 4 was pass a right to work law. Check. Pension reform. And then there were some second-tier priorities. Now, this is my district in Jefferson County and a little bit of Oldham. Pass smoke-free Kentucky. I voted for it before. If it comes up in the Senate, and if it passes the Senate, I'd vote for it again. 2, reform Kentucky's tax code. Like pension reform, it'll have to be dealt with in a special session because it is such a big topic. Expand gaming and gambling. I would vote to put it on the ballot, and like my colleague, I believe it's an opportunity. Frankly, I would vote for it, and I will push it if I get the opportunity to resolve, as he mentioned, our need for more revenue. But I would dedicate it not to the horse industry, frankly. I would dedicate it to our $39 billion unfunded liability. Other priorities were enable school tax credits, let you vote on a local option sales tax that Morgan referred to already. Again, this is my district, and it was by a little bit, not overwhelmingly, but a little bit. I think people favored it, but they also, by the same token, they favored in my district to require a pre-abortion ultrasound, which we did pass. I always, and I try not to make it a push poll as much as I can do that, and I included 2 items that I thought might have some legs. One was, should we give municipalities the right to raise their minimum wage? Louisville had it. I voted against it. I don't think it's a terribly good idea, but it was an issue I thought I need to ask my constituents about. Strongly opposed it. And the last is one that I personally, because I am pro-life at the beginning of life, I'm also pro-life related to the death penalty. My constituents did not like that idea and do not want me to touch it. I would, however, if someone were to propose the what's been referred to as the Maryland solution, which basically puts such a high bar on the death penalty that it would reduce the number of people that are on death row, I think, over time. Beyond that, I have some personal priorities that I've, on terms of bills that I filed or am very much supportive of and considering. One is modifying the rule of fifths, which for those that are not wonks It is how we allocate the transportation dollars in Kentucky. It was a formula designed in the 40s for a 1940s economy and the way the population was spread in the 1940s, and I believe we need to fix that. There's some other changes. One thing you saw the first week is there were a lot of complaints by my colleagues in the minority about, why are you moving so fast? We never moved this fast in the first week. Well, duh. That's exactly why we moved, because we waste so much time in Frankfort. In a normal year, even number year, this is when there's a filing, when we're going to be on the ballot. Normally, nothing happens until after that filing deadline. I have filed a bill, which is HB 31, to move the filing deadline to the Tuesday before Martin Luther King Day. What that would do is make productive about 3 weeks that are absolutely, totally waste. We waste 15 legislative days out of a 60-day session purely because waiting for filing deadline, and I think that's wrong. A number of other bills that are popular in some areas and very unpopular in others. Supersedious bonds in the cases of zoning cases, which is to say, if you object to a zoning matter that has been decided by Louisville Metro Council or by the Planning Commission, you can file suit as you can today. What my bill would do is to appeal, if you lose at circuit court, to appeal it, you need to put up a bond, which is very common in other states, Tennessee, for example, and many others. That's one thing that I would definitely do. I actually called the people that write the bills for us in Frankfort on the afternoon of October 28th. Does anybody remember what was announced October 28th? That was when Walmart said, we're out of here. And it made me quite angry. And there are some other bills, but I know you all have a lot of questions, so I'm going to give this back to Ryland. Thank you.
Thanks, Representative Miller. Now we have questions from the audience.
Thank you very much. The first question is for both members of our legislature. Many low-income Kentucky citizens have been covered by health insurance for the first time in their lives due to the ACA and Medicaid expansion. If that is reversed, what is the Republican plan to promote basic Medicaid or medical coverage for these people?
Is this loud? I think the plan would be the one filed by the governor last year. And given the change of administration, I would expect it to pass. Barring that, we have passed a 2-year budget, so the die is cast for the next 2 years.
What is that plan?
Yeah, I would just add that we're also waiting a lot to see what happens at the federal level. There's been a promise across this country to repeal the Affordable Care Act root and branch for several years now. The pieces are in place to do that if they so desire, or even if some people say they can't repeal it, they certainly have the votes to defund it, which would practically do the same thing. I think in Kentucky, you've seen the governor's plan for doing this. The legislature, controlled by the Republicans now, is not going to stop that plan, is the reality of it. But we'll have to see what happens on the federal level, I think, to see what happens in Kentucky.
Given the concern over the U of L bill that was voted on last week, is the General Assembly attentive to the concerns of the accrediting agencies with respect to those proposals, both by the governor and what you all passed last week?
Well, I will take first shot at that. I refer to it as a vexing issue that started a couple of years ago when the board of U of L was packed with people that did not comply with the law. In 2 respects, this board has a racial diversity requirement, and the board, as many do, have a political balance requirement. Both of those were ignored by the Beshear administration. Jack Conway found that. The governor, in pondering what to do, chose to replace the board. It's not uncommon. It's been done over the years where a governor would purge a board, basically restructure a board. That was found by Franklin Circuit to be in error, and they put a stay on it pending the appeal to the Supreme Court. What SACS, which is the Southern Association of Colleges, and they put U of L on probation because of what the governor did. What the legislature has done is to look at this and say, we can correct this ourselves. SACS has never objected to a legislature restructuring a board. They might have had an issue had we just simply rubber stamped the governor's restructuring. House Bill 10 was originally filed that way. I did not hear it in my committee. We actually canceled the meeting because we realized that we knew that wasn't that wasn't a good solution. Long story short, we wound up, the Senate passed Senate Bill 12 that abolished the old board. Effectively, it abolished the new Bevan board, and it threw it back to the higher education, post-secondary education group. They will nominate 30 people for the 10 positions on the U of L board, and that board will comply with the requirements of SACS, and the 4 elements on which U of L was put on probation completely addresses those. SACS has never objected to a legislature's restructuring.
I just want to take a stab at a couple of things and start off with, I agree with some of what Representative Miller said. I disagree with some of what he said. Yes, we sort of are in this predicament because the previous administration did not put the correct number of political appointees on the Board of Trustees. There's no way to get around that. But I want to go back to one thing that Representative Miller said in his opening remarks, and that's the speed at which the legislature moves. The Senate has kind of always moved this fast. We always pass bills the first week. This was not that uncommon for us. But there's a difference between doing something fast and doing something well. And I think when you look at what we did this week in the General Assembly, we did not do something well. The question was, did we take input from SACS? Now, I want to explain to you all how this happened. It was actually Representative Miller who's quoted in the Courier-Journal with his bill, House Bill 10, as saying we need a little more time to look at this. The next day, we were called into an unscheduled committee hearing, literally right off the floor of the Senate. We walked in thinking we were voting on a bill having to do with liability of premises owners for dog bites, something we voted on several years in a row. Instead, we were handed for the first time a bill that fundamentally changes the governing structure of our second largest university. There was no testimony provided from SACS. There was no evidence presented from anyone in higher education. And when the sponsor of the bill was questioned whether this bill would hurt or exacerbate the accreditation problems at the University of Louisville, the response was, I don't know. That was not a gamble I was willing to take. Representative Miller's right in the sense that SACS has never permanently pulled the accreditation of a university for legislative action, nor has a legislature codified, in essence, a governor's political proposal while the accreditation was on probation. I'm not saying we shouldn't act. The board was out of balance, and there's some good things in the law. The Senate confirmation piece, I think, is actually a good thing. I think we need probably a way, and it's not in this bill. Keep in mind, when Senate Bill 12 was proposed, one of the other things that was told to us is there will be more legislation coming, which is always a dangerous way to vote on legislation, the promise that something else will happen. But there is a Senate bill out there right now, Senate Bill 107, that deals with the higher ed reforms and expands them to more universities in Kentucky. There is a way in Senate Bill 107 for a governor or a legislature to go in and undo if another governor puts the inappropriate people on the board. I think that's important, right? We had no mechanism with which to deal with that. But keep in mind that basically, in essence, when we voted on this in the legislature last week, we were playing chicken with sacks. I hope it ends well. And this is not a partisan issue. Had we had any assurance from anyone in higher education that this wouldn't hurt the University of Louisville, I'd have voted for it, right? But we didn't have those assurances. So I think when you look at this, we didn't have enough time to thoughtfully debate this. I felt like in the Senate, maybe in the House they did, but certainly in the Senate we didn't. We voted on an unforeseen bill. We adjourned the committee, walked straight back onto the floor, and voted it the same day off the floor. We were voting on legislation anyway. We should work. We work every day. We're up there. But I don't think this was done in the appropriate manner.
If I could ask a follow-up on this, Representative Miller, since Sachs ostensibly put the university's accreditation on probation because of the governor's actions, possibly being undue political influence on the governing body of the school, is there any concern that the legislature doing a similar action, might also be considered undue political influence?
Sure. In 1992, Governor Barton, actually earlier in 91, Governor Wilkinson appointed himself to the University of Kentucky Board. About that time, there were some problems with some of the regional universities' boards, a couple of them, and Governor Barton Jones asked the legislature to restructure all of those boards. He did that in one fell swoop, and Sachs had no issue with it. The urgency, and I want to address that, and I know the Senate probably didn't have time to study and debate it as we did in the House. But the urgency was we knew Sachs was going to provide guidance on how best the university could get off probation quickly. We also knew that we wanted to fix the U of L board so it was not out of compliance both racially and politically. So we chose to make our fix, which again, it included Senate confirmation of the board member appointments, which has never been in there. And actually, when Sachs found that out, they were surprised that Kentucky Senate never had to confirm people. So now we know Sachs knows what our proposal is. Sachs can respond and I think sometime later this week, Sachs will finally submit that letter. And then in House Bill 107 or Senate Bill 107 that President Stivers has filed, we can amend that for anything else that's in the Sachs letter. So I feel very comfortable with this. I have a lot of U of L people in my district, both students, staff, and faculty. And finally, Robert Stivers, who actually carried the bill, he sponsored the bill. He has two daughters that are going to be graduating from the University of Louisville in the next 15 months. And as I told my colleague Saturday, this isn't about politics. This is personal with Senator Stivers. And he's not going to do anything that's going to jeopardize the value of the education of his two daughters. Thank you.
I agree with Representative Miller's assessment, in particular of President Stivers. He's a good person, and I think he tries to do the right thing. We didn't know if this would be the right thing when we voted on it. And I want to go back to another thing, too, is that we're providing a legislative fix for something where there's not necessarily a legislative fix needed. Yes, there were too many Democrats and there were not enough minorities on the board of the University of Louisville. We know that. Today, there are 5 vacancies on the board of the University of Louisville Board of Trustees. The governor has chosen not to fill those vacancies and not bring the University of Louisville board within compliance. 2 more people will rotate off the board by June of this year, which is the next time Sachs meets, by the way, which would provide 7 Republicans appointed by the governor and the requisite number of minorities. That would bring the board fully within compliance and no legislation would be needed. What we have done is we have taken a chance that by getting the legislature involved, reducing the number from 17 to 10, without any testimony about whether that's good or not, maybe it is. Maybe it is better to have a smaller board. We don't know. But the governor thought it was when he messed with the board the first time, and the court said you violated the law by doing that. And then Sachs pulled the accreditation because the governor's actions put undue political influence on the board of the University of Louisville. We're essentially now taking those actions, putting them through the legislature while the University of Louisville's accreditation is on probation. We're not looking for a non-legislative fix, and I just think there's some danger in moving this quickly without further evidence.
All right, let's move on.
The next question is addressed to Representative Miller, but also if Senator McGarvey can address this. You mentioned tort reform as a top priority. Can you explain why medical review panels did not move, I'm assuming, in the first week of the session? And will it move in February? Why was this a top priority?
Okay. The medical malpractice climate in Kentucky can be summed up by watching about an hour of television, because you will see repeated Morgan & Morgan, Hughes and Coleman, on and on and on. And while I have great sympathy for the people that are injured, it is obvious there's a feeding frenzy in Kentucky. And why is that? Because if you look at the medical malpractice environment, the tort environment, all the states around us have dealt with this. We've not. And we've not because the trial lawyers have frankly controlled the Democrat House leadership. We are going to take action. It was too big to deal with in 5 days. Some would say what we did was too big to do in 5 days. However, having said that, that will be, I believe it will be heard in committee in February and voted on in March.
You know, I take a slightly different view, and I take a view as a lawyer, right? Nobody likes frivolous lawsuits. We in the profession don't like them. I see officers of the court here, you all don't like them either, right? The reality is with medical malpractice and true medical negligence claims, there's already a heightened standard of care. You have to have your experts lined up before you file a lawsuit. The medical malpractice frivolous claims, that's a different deal, right, than what you see in normal personal injury. And so what a lot of studies have shown is that the review panels that we've proposed right now don't actually limit the number of claims. And the reason is all you're doing is setting up a review panel. If an attorney's going to file a frivolous claim, they're still going to file that frivolous claim and it goes to the review panel. The good claims will still make it through the review panel. By the way, in this legislation, the bad claims also make it through the review panel. The review panel just simply says we don't think this is a worthwhile claim, but it doesn't actually prevent the claim from going on to court. So the evidence from other states that have done this have not actually seen a decrease in the medical malpractice claims. I think this is more of a special interest bill for the insurance companies that we've prevented in the past in Kentucky. And I think we should look long and hard at whether it's effective this time as well.
Both of you mentioned in your opening statements about the need for pension improvements and funding. Could you all both talk about what you hope to accomplish during this session, and then maybe also a longer-term view as to what is needed to be able to address the pension crisis?
Switch it up, Senator McGarvey.
Yeah. We passed reforms. My very first vote in the Senate was on pension reform. A lot of people don't know this, but no state employees currently being hired are eligible for a pension. No legislators, none of the new legislators are receiving a pension. So in that sense, we're not having new pension people come in. You could argue that's a good or a bad thing, but it is what the law is right now. 30 years from now, we won't have as much of a pension problem because people won't be collecting a pension. What it did in the short term, though, and I voted for the bill, what it did in the short term is it exacerbated the problem. Because a pension, of course, you have the people who are coming into the system and young funding the people who are retired. It's an unfunded liability. I've said this before, I'll say it again. There is only one way to fix an unfunded liability, and that's by funding it. And that's why I think when you look at what we have going on, I think tax reform is one of the most important issues facing the state right now. And so the other thing is, I'll say that when it comes to the pensions, and Representative Miller, I'll let you expand on this too if you want, it's ruled to be an inviolable contract with people. So I think it's something that when you look at people who are currently in the system and are retired, we have both a legal and a moral obligation to fulfill. And that's because although it is taxpayer money, and I think we would agree sitting at the table that we must be the ultimate stewards of taxpayer money, the pensions are also funded by the people who pay into them. And, you know, I said this in my remarks, and I'll just repeat it again. Imagine putting yourselves in our position and going to someone who's been paving roads for 20 years or teaching our kids for 25 years, that have paid every year, that have come to work every day expecting that we'll take care of them on the back end because that's what we promised to do, and telling them that you're going to take that away. I just don't think that's something we should do, so I think we have to look for more ways to add funding to the pension system.
Thanks. And Representative, if you could just tack on to that question, you know, can the pension crisis be solved without looking for new revenue?
Given the size of them, I question whether it can. I truly do, because without continuing to eat up so much of the state budget, I mean, healthcare, for example, could we have afforded what Governor Beshear did in terms of Obamacare? Absolutely. We could probably afforded that if we didn't have $39 billion staring us, and that has to be dealt with in the next decade or so. It's a vexing problem. That's why it's going to go out into a special session. Now, I will make several comments about my friend's comments about funding. My first experience with pensions, actually unknowingly, was when I was in the Fletcher administration, I joined the Kentucky Employee Retirement System Non-Hazardous Fund. At the time, in January of 2004, it was fully funded. Fully funded. My next encounter with it, of course, I didn't even know it was a problem then, was when I was a Metro councilman, and the fastest growing element of our budget was pensions. And that's what took my breath away and why I became very much of a passionate pension hawk, I'll call myself. Next is fully fund the pensions. Well, CERS is the subgroup that controls the cities and counties and some other entities. That has always been funded according to what the actuaries said you need to put in, and they're less than 60% funded. Generally speaking, if you're not close to 80%, you don't have a healthy pension plan. They've been fully funding CERS forever. They never missed a payment, and it's still close to 60% funded. Teachers was another matter. It's a lot, to me, it's much more complex than the others. But we have to make some changes, and there's going to be, and that's structural changes is part of it. My friend also mentioned that employees have always paid in. Absolutely true. The difference is that when these plans were set up, the employees were paying about as much as the state was putting in. Now, it's a fraction. It's a tiny part of the total pension cost because it's not been allowed to rise. Why is that? Because somebody came up with a theory, well, that's part of the inviolable contract. I don't understand that, but so it's a tough issue, and there's going to have to be a lot of brain power put toward this one to be able to resolve this.
You mentioned structural changes. Can you provide any more detail on what kind of structural changes lawmakers might look at, and I guess any other solutions that lawmakers might be looking at in the possible special session?
Well, I don't know. In the special session, I don't not privy to all the conversations. I just became state government committee chair, which is where this will be heard. But I will say I don't know of anybody else talking about passing gaming to pay for pensions, but I think we've got to come up, and that's not the panacea because there's not that much money that you're going to generate from expanded gaming, but we need every nickel we can find to put toward this. In terms of other structural things, I won't go into it other than to say the fix of 2013 was to stop putting people in a pure defined benefit pension plan. That was nice, but what they put them in was a hybrid. And they guaranteed them, everybody that's been hired from January 1, 2014 to today is going into this hybrid plan. The hybrid plan is far underwater because we've not had returns of 4%. So we actually, while the belief was we were fixing the problem, we've actually added to the problem. So I think you will see another version where new employees go into purely a 401k plan. And now that's I will say that for non-hazardous, or for non-hazardous non-teachers. Now, again, teachers is a completely different animal, and it's too complex to brush over. So,
Thanks.
The next question is for both of the panelists. We had a number of questions regarding the bathroom bill. I guess to sum them up, is that a realistic option for the legislature in this session? And if so, what would be the rationale for passing such a bill at this time?
well, it was filed by a Democrat from Bell County who had a tough race. He filed both the bathroom bill and the religious freedom bill that had been filed in earlier sessions. I frankly, regarding the bathroom bill, agree with the governor. I don't know that we really have a problem there, so let's not go searching for a fix for a problem that doesn't really exist. As far as the religious freedom, I have not read that bill, and I wouldn't care to comment, frankly, and it's not a given that that bill is going to, either of those bills is going to be heard.
So I'll just start off by agreeing with Representative Miller on most of what he said, and add that this bill's also been filed in the Senate by a Republican. What I'm hearing, and again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing is that in this short session there truly are a number of other bills that have a priority and that we're not going to take these up. And I hope that the legislators throughout the state of Kentucky and our executives have seen what have happened in Indiana, have seen what have happened in North Carolina, and regardless of where you are from sort of a personal perspective on this, that you can at least look at the economic impact it's having on these states. I mean, North Carolina lost the NBA All-Star game, guys. You know, this is not something we need to do. You can go to the ACC championship this spring in Louisville that we got from North Carolina because of what they passed, and realize this is not where our focus needs to be.
Right.
For both, what do you think is the best thing that you can expect out of the General Assembly to improve education? That's the first part of the question. And the second part is, what can be done in particular to those people who have lower income or modest incomes to be able to help them and their children to be able to move through the system?
So I feel like all of these questions could be an entire forum. So we're going through pensions and education and healthcare, and give us what you think about it in 30 seconds or less. So in education, I'll start broader, because I think when you get into sort of the charter school debate, that's a huge debate that we can put, that both Representative Miller and I are very capable of putting in a bumper sticker to represent both of our sides, but probably doesn't give that debate the weight it deserves in this forum. So I'll say that one thing we need to do, and this goes back to tax reform and pensions and money in Kentucky, let's fund Bucks for Brains. We're falling behind. You know, I mentioned that we're one of 4 of 20 southern states that has basically cut higher education. We're really only one of 2. The other 2 southern states just didn't increase their higher education budget. We were on the right track in the late 90s and early 2000s, and we were getting top quality professors, and we were rising in the rankings, and that's not happening right now. And I think we need to do that. Along those lines, I think we also need to invest not just in colleges, but in any type of degree. There's a 55,000 degrees program here that does a great job. Let's look at our workforce and technical education, KCTCS. Don't just lump education and higher education into the university system. For what we would do for our more poor and working class people in Kentucky, I think one of the single greatest anti-poverty measures the last half of the 20th century was the earned income tax credit. This was supported by Republican and Democratic presidents alike. We don't have a state earned income tax credit bill in Kentucky. I've filed a standalone bill every year since I've been in the legislature to this effect, and I think that we'll be negligent if we don't make it part of tax reform.
Well, the last part wasn't education related, but I will say that in the 2 sessions I've been through, in 15 and 16, I've stated on the floor that I support that changing our tax code to a consumption-based system like Tennessee, but putting in an element of what is referred to as the fair tax. So you can Google fair tax and you see it basically gives you a prebate for the amount of sales tax you would pay if you are at 150% of the poverty level. My belief is I want that to be a part of tax reform because I like the Tennessee system. My daughter lives in Tennessee, along all of my grandkids, and I like that system. But it's not a fair, in my view, it's not a fair system unless you do something for the low income and fixed income people. Regarding education, Morgan's been at this a lot longer than I have at the state level, and I will only say that charter schools is popular in Republican circles, clearly, but it's been seen as an issue that can help urban education. In 20%, and I think the numbers are right, about 20% of the students, K-12 students in Jefferson County, are not in JCPS. They are in Catholic, they are in KCD, they are in Christian Academy. Those parents scrape enough money up to send their kids to private school or parochial school. Why not give low-income people that same choice of sending their students to a school where all the students and the parents of those students want them to be there and want them to learn on a daily basis? Charter schools is not a panacea, but it is something that will happen. You can take that one to the bank. I'm not sure exactly the form, but in some form it will pass.
So I just want to address that really quickly. Yes, look, I mean, we know that the Republicans have a supermajority in the House and in the Senate, so you will probably see some form of charter schools pass this legislative session. You know, what I want to point out, though, is this idea that the urban educationer, that we need choice. I went to a charter school in Jefferson County. I'm a graduate of DuPont Manual High School. If you want to say that's anything other than a charter school, I disagree. In my experience, we have two types of parents in Jefferson County. I say this having just toured 7 public elementary schools where to send my kids to kindergarten next year. Yes, kids, we have twins. We have two types at its base level. We have choosers and non-choosers, right? Our challenge is not necessarily coming up with a new school. Our challenge is how do we make more families active choosers? I've seen different statistics. I've seen we have an 81% market share of Jefferson County public schools here in Louisville. That's phenomenal. That keeps us from looking like St. Louis. That keeps us from looking like other big cities that are effectively donuts, where no one lives in the center of the city's core and they all live in the surrounding suburbs. And I think if we do charter schools, we do it at that peril.
This is a question addressed to Representative Miller, but I guess also there could be comment from Senator McGarvey. Why did the recent bills of right to work, repeal of the prevailing wage, and this person also believes regarding the abortion bill, have emergency clauses in those bills? Why was it necessary to have an emergency clause within those bills?
I think in large part it gets back to the, in terms of the abortion elements, those two bills that dealt with the unborn, it really dealt with pent-up frustration over the years that Representative Birch would not even hear a bill in his committee. So I think those two are separate. Regarding the others, those are immediate benefit. When the governor signed those on Saturday night, immediately we now are fishing in a pond a third larger than it was before, because any site selection person will tell you one of the first questions they ask about states that they may take their jobs is, are they right to work state? Prevailing wage is just purely a money saving thing. And I said this on the floor actually it was probably Wednesday or Thursday when we passed that finally. My district in Jefferson County, the area that I'm in, has had no high school built in it that it wasn't private or parochial since 1951, before I was born. It has had no middle school built since probably 1974, And it has one elementary school built, Stouffer, in 2000, I think it opened in 2007. But my district, just in the last 16 years, has grown 60% in population. Well, where are those kids going? Well, they don't want to go where JCPS wants them to go, so they are self-selecting to private parochial. Their parents are moving to Oldham County or somewhere else, or they're getting bussed. Because you can't, it is a frustration to real estate agents for people coming into our community, and they cannot tell a prospective parent or a parent of a prospective student that their child will go to this school, which happens to be 3 miles from their house.
I won't get back into charter schools, but I will just say on the emergency clause, look, I think it was largely political. You can call it a pent-up demand. I think it was largely political, and I don't say that in a disparaging way at all. If I were a Republican, I would have done the same thing. They have it, so they have that power. They can do it, and they did it. But I do think it was to send a political signal as much as anything. To talk a little bit, just briefly, about the right to work and the prevailing wage laws that went into effect and why I voted against them. On right to work, make no mistake, we used the power of the government to undo a privately bargained for contract. So I'm interested to see if that ideology holds in the General Assembly. On prevailing wage, I think it's simple, right? And this is one where I think Democrats made a mistake too. I want to point that out. Democrats for far too long have been the party of no. We buried our heads in the sand and refused to fix potential problems. And the prevailing wage formula could have used some tinkering. We've heard from very respected people within the business and construction communities that there were some things that didn't quite make sense under the current formula. I was sympathetic to some of those concerns. But the nice thing about prevailing wage, these are only government contracts. These didn't apply if you're building a Walgreens or you're building a new McDonald's, right? This is government contracts. And what we did is we said whoever's vying to be the lowest bidder cannot use wages as a way of giving the lowest bid. In construction projects, there's two main ways to affect your cost: labor and materials, right? And so I think when you look at what government does in building our bridges and building the roads we take to work every day and building the schools where our kids go, I'm not willing to try and balance our budget on the backs of the men and women who build the things we use every day. I'm afraid that with prevailing wage, it's going to end up being more of a bonanza for out-of-state companies that come in and build with low-wage bids than actually benefiting Kentucky. Hope I'm wrong, but that's my fear.
Got time for one more question.
This will sum it all up for both legislators. You've both mentioned a number of different issues you wanted to see addressed in this session. Would you all both maybe talk about one of the issues that we didn't ask a question about that you'd like to see get passed and that has a realistic chance of passing, and why that's important to you?
We've touched on a lot of issues today, so I'll give myself a quick plug. I've proposed a bill this session, which I think is a good bill, and again protects people in Kentucky. We've asked a lot about people in Kentucky. How do we protect them? Currently, we're one of the few states that allows creditors to garnish health savings accounts. It's a simple fix, right? And it has widespread support. And so I've proposed a bill to keep creditors from garnishing health savings accounts. I think that for people who put that money into an account, it's capped, it's restricted. This is not where people go to hide assets, and it really hurts people who are down on their luck. I think that's a good bill we should pass and sends a good signal that could be a bipartisan one from this General Assembly.
And Senator, if that passes your House, I'll vote for it.
Thank you.
So, some bills that I'd like to see, I'm not sure that what form they'll come out in, so I'll just talk about a personal priority, which is public benefit corporations. Kentucky is one of a minority states, maybe 18, 19 states, that do not allow public benefit corporations. A public benefit corporation is a for-profit company that has a dual purpose. It has a social benefit as defined in their charter, and it is a for-profit company. Think of it as a company that the founder wants to incorporate certain values in the way he or she operates their company. If that company ever goes public or ever gets minority shareholders, venture capital or whatever, minority lawsuits can come against the board for doing nothing more than operating the company the way it's always been operated. And this isn't a great example, but were Chick-fil-A a public benefit corporation? Well, they are not a public benefit corporation, but let's say they were a public corporation. One day, a venture capitalist or minority shareholder could sue that company's board and say, you open on Sunday because you'll make 25% more money than you do now because all your stores are in malls and high traffic areas. So public benefit corporations, it's failed in the past. I'm making this a crusade. GLI is behind me on this, and I'm trying to convince a lot of other people to make this happen, and hopefully I'll be successful.
All right, thank you. On behalf of the Louisville Forum, I'd like to thank our panelists and our moderator. And mark your calendars, our annual dinner program. It's going to be held on Wednesday, February 15th at the University Club. And the Honorable Jerry Abramson will be our keynote speaker, and he's going to give us an update on his time as Director of Intergovernmental Affairs for President Obama. So to make reservations, go to our website, louisvilleforum.org, or you can call our voicemail at 329-0111. Thank you.